Hey everyone, I'm Andy Petronic, and this is the Whole Life Challenge podcast. It's the place we connect with extraordinary people, ones who think differently, who have risen to the top of their field, who have vast knowledge, experience, and insights to share, as well as incredible stories to tell. They are also the ones who have figured out a way to take their life's experience and turn it into something that truly makes a difference in the world for others. These are their stories. Hey gang, it's Andy Petronic and welcome back. It's episode number 119 of the Whole Life Challenge podcast. And this morning I have got Bobby Gill. What a great name, Bobby Gill. Just rolls right off your tongue. So easy to say. He was a fantastic guest. You probably don't know him. He's the director of corporate development for the Savory Institute. And the Savory Institute is a nonprofit organization. It's based in Boulder, Colorado, that is in the process of regenerating the world's grasslands through the holistic management of livestock. The Savory Institute trains farmers, ranchers, and pastoralist communities around the world through a network of educational hubs that provide training and resources on holistic land and livestock management in a regionally specific context. Whew. Bobby previously worked as the lead scientist reviewer for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. He's got a lot of experience, guys, in a lot of different areas. And believe it or not, he's also an elite former ultramarathon runner, a former skydiving instructor. He lives in Denver, Colorado. He CrossFits. He's a rock ice climber. He's a skier. So we had a lot to talk about. Some of the highlights from the episode, we talked about, well, first of all, we talked about the Savory Institute's mission, and we talk a lot about the sustainable use of grasslands in the world, and how grass-fed, I mean, we're all used to going out and looking for grass-fed beef. Well, a lot of people are. But when it comes down to it, grass-fed's not enough. You know, grass-fed only describes half the equation. It's how the cow is fed, but how are the lands taken care of that those cows are on, that cattle is on? Alan Savory, Bobby explains in the podcast that he was inspired so much by Alan Savory's TED Talk that he did whatever it took to get to be part of this organization. And that's how he got to his work with the Savory Institute. We talk about the polyface farm from the Omnivore's Dilemma. It's an example of a perfectly balanced symbiotic farm where everything is used. Everything is used from the top of the chain to the bottom of the chain. It's really kind of an amazing setup. And it's really what the Savory Institute does, is teach farmers how to do that. We talk about the new upcoming Savory Institute's certification program, so that you'll be able to see on packaging that the farm that was responsible for that grass-fed product is a Savory Institute certified farm. We talk about bison. We talk about mobile electric fences. We talk about ultramarathoning and the relationship between ultramarathoning and overgrazing, believe it or not. We talk about cows burping methane. That was kind of a funny conversation we had. We talk about ice baths, hot cold cycles from Russian spas. We talk about some documentary movies that we both enjoy and have enjoyed. And we talk about finding sources of good grass-fed beef in your own community. So Bobby's got a lot to share. He's a great resource. He talks about how he keeps his life together also, which I always find very intriguing on these podcasts. Very successful people having to deal with, how do they do their life? So, yeah, that's what we got. That's coming up in about 3 minutes. So the next piece is my fan of the week, and I've got a new review this week they're trickling in. Guys, please leave reviews in iTunes. It's the only way to help grow this podcast, and we're not doing any advertising right now. And you guys can help. We're not asking you for money. We're not asking anybody for money. We're asking you to write a review. If you like the podcast, please go to the podcast to iTunes and write a review. This is from Jazzman 1965, and here's what he says. As a biohacker and podcast aficionado, I sometimes get a bit burned out listening to many of the same talking heads hawking their latest products, books, etc. The Whole Life Challenge podcast is different. Andy Petronic has a knack for lining up outstanding guests and having conversations that are both informative and fun to listen to. When he had Joe D.I. from Runga fame on, and also the Spartan race, I was literally crying. I was laughing so hard. This has become my favorite place to find great topics and great speakers. Thank you, Jazzman1965. If you want your review read on the air, go to iTunes, leave a review. Here's the link. It's bit.ly/WLC-podcast. That will, if you put that in your browser, that will open up iTunes, and then you hit the little tab on iTunes that says ratings and reviews, and you click write a review. Don't just give it a rating, give it a review. And you too could be fan of the week. If you are fan of the week, let me know. Send me an email at podcast@wholelifechallenge.com and claim the fact that you did it, and I'll send you a t-shirt. So I really appreciate it. And I know that's just a small token of my appreciation, but it's at least something I can do. What else do I want to say? We are in the longest period between challenges of the year. It's December. We're getting ready for the holidays. Nobody really wants to talk about engaging in any sort of nutritional challenge at this point, although I would recommend it. But the Whole Life Challenge is coming up on January 20th of 2018, and I hope you'll be there. It's the first challenge ever that is 6 weeks long. No longer 8 weeks. So it's going to be different. It's going to be a little easier to finish. And that's what we all want to do, finish, right? So be there. And if you're going to do it, might as well register now because it's at a discounted price, $39. Remember, if you want more details from this episode, we're going to have show notes, we're going to have links, we're going to have everything. Go to wholelifechallenge.com/podcast. And the episode, the way the episodes are titled, they always start with a number, which is episode 119. So it just says 119, and you'll find it. Bobby Gill. Look for Bobby Gill. And again, if you want to find me, podcast@wholelifechallenge.com. Anyway, let's get on with the episode. So get ready for the one, the only Bobby Gill. I do really well when I get to bed by like 9:30. And, sometimes I even go to bed when I put my son to bed at like 8:30. And I just do great. I feel great in the morning. I get up at, 4:30 or 5. I get a jump start in front before everybody else is up. I have like 3 things I like to do when I'm up before everybody else. I like to do a little mobility routine. I like to do some meditation, and I do some journaling. Mm-hmm. This morning I got up at 7. I was behind immediately because I got to get my son to school. God, it's stupid. And I knew that last night when I started watching Stranger Things. Like God, come on, dude. Stop. It is. Stop.
And it's funny. I've been telling people this lately. So I listen to a ton of podcasts and a ton of audiobooks. Yeah. And, I watch Netflix and HBO, like all the shows that people watch. And then like everything that I do in life, I'm just like consuming content and just like processing all this media and content and new things that I'm thinking of. And like, I don't have time to like really unpack it. Found like I need that meditation. Yeah. But I find myself being so connected in with like my phone and like everything else and like notifications from Slack and emails and texts and blah, 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 blah. And like you realize that a lot of this stuff is like junk food for the brain.
Yeah,
where
really,
you're
really.
It's like small little bites that, it gives you that little temporary satisfaction, but truly it's not good for you. And like really what you need is like the meditation and like getting up early and doing the journaling like you're saying and all that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, damn, I really need to have that, because like I pay attention to my own personal health, like physical and, you know, like what I do for, you know, health and fitness and nutrition and all that. But like mentally, I'm a total slob and like fully addicted to the junk food, social media hits that just come at you all the time.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking about that with a friend last night. How he took a month off of drinking alcohol. He was noticing that when he would come home, he would have 2 glasses of wine, and it would cause a layer of disconnect from his family, from his kids, from, you know, like it would just it became this layer that was, I don't know, kind of getting in the way of him feeling fully connected to his family. And so he decided to take a month off of drinking alcohol at all. And then I made the connection to, I'm like, that it's the same thing with electronics. It's the same thing with, you know, like it's so hard in today's world to free yourself from the constant pull of, you know, you can always do more work. You can always connect with more people. You can always invite more friends to see your Facebook page. You can always, you know, it's a never ending barrage. You know, like my wife's dad was in the advertising business back in the 60s, like Mad Men.
Oh wow.
And you know, you just think back then, if you wanted to go disappear for a couple hours in the middle of the day and watch a movie, you could totally do it. Nobody'd find you. They would not find you. You were not findable. You know, like, I like, was a completely different time. Expectations were different too. You know, like,
it wasn't as fast paced. Well, right. I mean, maybe in some capacities it was, but there wasn't the expectation to perform, and, you know, busy being the indicator of, you know, how successful you are. Like, oh, I'm so busy. Versus back in the day, if you're one of those people who could, you know, have all this leisure time and you know, kick back and relax, like that was the sign of success. Yeah. And like the script has totally flipped.
Yeah. If you left work at 5, you left work. There was no. Yeah. You didn't bring your work home. Well, I mean, some people probably did, but it's not like you had your computer. And you had everything available.
Well, you carry a briefcase around, like, and that's your work that you bring with you, but it's not. It's not the same as, like, you know, in your pocket you have every document ever, and everyone has access to you instantaneously. Right.
Yeah. Well, we should probably start talking about, you know, why you're on the podcast. I hit record in the middle of that conversation because I thought, you know, we always talk about fun stuff at the beginning, and I always blow it by not pressing record. I met you at PaleoFX last year, and immediately knowing just from a 2-second, I don't remember who introduced us.
Was it Robert Morton from?
It was Robert Morton. It was Robert Morton. Yeah. Yep, it was Robert Morton. And when he told me just literally like 30-second spiel on Savory Institute and what you were doing, I'm like, oh my God, I have to meet you, and I have to have you on this podcast. And it's taken me a while to get this scheduled, but I just feel like the work that you're doing and the Savory Institute is up to is so important. And well, why don't you give everyone a kind of primer on what it is, what is the Savory Institute, and what are you up to? And then we'll go into other things and, you know, kind of see where the conversation goes.
Yeah. So I guess, like, from a 30,000 foot viewpoint, the Savory Institute, we are a nonprofit based out of Colorado, in Boulder is where I'm at right now. We've got a small team of about 12, but we have hubs all around the world. And what we do is we focus on the restoration of the world's grasslands using what we call holistic management of livestock. So essentially, our founder, Alan Savory, developed this method and system, well, not really a system, of grazing management back in the 60s when he was in, well, it was Rhodesia. Now it split into Zimbabwe and Zambia. But he developed this system that basically honors the symbiotic relationships of livestock on grasslands. And basically, we teach people how to manage their herds of cattle or goats or sheep or bison or any type of ruminant animal in a way that isn't just like, oh, this is grass-fed beef, but in a way that is going to say this grass-fed beef, the way that it is raised on the land, the way that they move across the land and their grazing patterns and the time and the density of animals on a specific piece of land, do so in a way that's going to regenerate the health of that ecosystem. What you have out there today, there are a lot of people who are raising, great, healthy grass-fed beef or grass-fed dairy or whatever it may be, but they're doing so in a way that is, it's not necessarily the best for the land itself. And so you're seeing, since the advent of agriculture 10,000 years ago, the health of our planet has been getting worse and worse and worse. Industrializing food systems has not been good for our personal health, and it hasn't been good for the health of the planet either. So what we're out there doing is teaching farmers and ranchers and even pastoralist communities, like in third world countries where they kind of like communally own land, teaching folks how to graze their animals in a way that's going to restore the health of those grasslands, but taking that holistic approach that looks at the triple bottom line. So if it's going to improve the environmental aspects, it should also be economically viable, because if it's not economically viable and people aren't like maintaining their livelihoods and thriving, then they're not going to keep doing the ecological restoration piece. And then similarly, if it's not socially just, that's kind of an extractive environment that doesn't really make sense, and also is not sustainable in the long term. So we focus on that triple bottom line of environmental, economic, and social, making sure that all of those pieces are taken care of when folks are farming and ranching and raising livestock on grasslands. You're starting to hear more about regenerative agriculture. Some folks are talking about that like in crops and whatnot. But I think when it comes to meat and dairy, these livestock products, that's really where the greatest potential lies for regenerating the health of our planet, and doing so in a way that is regenerating health for the land, but it's also healthy animals. And when you have healthy animals, they're going to create more nutrient-dense, healthy food for us, the individual. It's all interconnected.
Are you working to change the conversation from the idea that ruminant animals, cattle, beef are it's an unsustainable, like the idea that a lot of people that are in the vegetarian world or kind of against the use of beef and whatnot because of it's unsustainable. Right. Like is that a conversation you're trying to shift?
For sure. I mean, I would say our primary focus is influencing the boots on the ground, those that are managing land and livestock, and getting the right resources and training into their hands.
Yep.
So that they can be better stewards of their land and provide better food back into, our supply chains. But a piece of that is bringing the consumer into play, because, each of us makes purchasing decisions every day for the food we buy and even the clothes that we wear, or, cosmetic products or pet food or any number of things that can come from livestock and, is a result of agriculture. So I think the consumer does play a very important piece of that. And, from the Savory Institute's perspective, we're a small nonprofit of 12 people, but we've got these hubs all over the world that are locally owned and locally operated. So they, provide the training to their local region in that regionally specific context of what their land and geography and climate and social structure and politics and whatnot are like. But, aside from the training piece that we focus on, now we're starting to to look at it and say, hey, all of these farmers that we have trained over the years, we've affected some 17.5 million acres of land through our work. There's wonderful product that is out there. There's great beef, there's great dairy, there's great leather, there's great wool. That's all going back to restore the health of our planet. And, I think that the consumer deserves to know that when you go and buy, a steak at the store or like a Greek yogurt at the store or whatever it may be, like, it's not just, oh, is this grass fed? Like, there's more to that story that we don't know about. Mm-hmm. There is, how much carbon was sequestered back into the soil through the improved grasslands that these cows were raised on. When you sequester more soil, the water holding capacity of soil increases. So, in terms of access to water and preventing floods and droughts, that's all tied back. When you are restoring these lands, there's wildlife habitat that gets restored. So if you care about, cute furry animals that, like whatever it may be, there's all these different things that are intertwined. And I think the consumer deserves to know about that.
How would a consumer know? Like, how would I know? I go, it's funny because I literally was having a conversation with my partner, Michael Stanwyck, about he typically knows a lot of things about food that I just don't know.
Right.
And I was like, hey, I want to order some grass-fed beef. I want to stock. We have a freezer and a deep freezer in our garage, and I just started going online. I'm like, I've ordered from U.S. Wellness Meats. I've ordered from a few different companies, but I wonder what else is out there. And I'm like, how do I choose? Like, do I go by price? Do I go by price? Do I go by location? Do I go by, they're in the U.S.? Like, and yes, I mean, how does a consumer know these things?
Most people would shop by price. That's like the main driver of how people make their purchasing behaviors. And I think that's unfortunate because the prices that we see in the store aren't really reflective of the true cost of what's happening. Yep. We've got a food system that's propped up by corn subsidies and crop insurance, which takes the conventional kind of CAFO beef and monocropped foods and kind of drives those prices down, and we have an oversupply of all of that.
Monocropped or like soy, corn. Those are the big ones.
Yeah. So you think of like a polyculture. It's many different species that would exist in an ecosystem. So a variety of different foods and plants and animals and everything. That's just how ecosystems were, in our evolutionary history on this planet. There was a biodiversity of things. With the advent of agriculture 10,000 years ago, we started domesticating our crops and our livestock, and then started managing the land in a way so that we could maximize the return that we would get instead of just hunting and gathering like we had done previously.
Right.
So the true cost accounting, what I'm getting at is, when you are comparing, the price of a grass-fed steak versus the price of a CAFO steak, the CAFO steak is going to be much cheaper, but that's because it has all of these corn subsidies and crop insurance and all these other pieces that have driven that price down, and it's kind of externalized any of the environmental or social implications that have happened to it. Right. So it's not really taking into consideration that, like, yeah, this is super cheap, but also, it was extremely fossil fuel intensive to produce this, that, and the other thing. There was lots of carbon that was released out of the ground through the way that this stuff was managed. All these environmental and social pieces are all externalized, and so you don't realize that at the label. So, when a consumer goes to buy something, you're looking at, you've got different certifications on the label, like, yep. Is it grass-fed? Is it non-GMO? Is it animal welfare approved? Is it gluten-free? Is it blah, blah, blah? Like, there's a ton of different things. But those are all, like, in my perspective, that's great. And, like, that's the best of what we have right now. But those are all inputs. It's like a checklist of what was the recipe that went into making this thing. Like, what did you do on the front end? It's not actually looking at the outcomes that happened, because really, if you ask people, what do you really want to know? Like, what's going to improve my own personal health? and what's going to improve the health of this planet. Like that's really what we care about. And all these labels and certifications are all kind of a proxy to the outcomes that we really want to know about. So with the Savory Institute, what we're doing is we've got a new program that is underway, and it's going to be launching next year, where we are since we have these hubs and farmer networks all around the world, we've developed a scientific methodology that we're going to be measuring the actual outcomes on the land, looking at things like percentage of bare ground, how much grass is growing, looking at biodiversity, looking at water holding capacity and soil organic carbon, basically looking at a variety of factors, both above ground and below ground, to get this holistic measurement of what's happening on that land, and then looking at that over time. So, you look at it at time point 0, and then you look at it a year later. And if that trend line is heading up, well, that land's regenerating. That means that farmer's doing something right, and we want to encourage them to do that. And the consumer should know that that farmer is doing that right thing.
Yep.
So essentially what we're doing is we're going to be measuring the outcomes on land, and then we're working with brands like Epic Bar, for example. They're a close partner of ours. They source a lot of their protein from farms that are in the Savory Global Network. And others like Maple Hill Creamery. It's a yogurt brand that you'll see at Whole Foods and a bunch of other places. We're working with some philosophically aligned brands to help tell this story of ecological restoration through the way that livestock are managed. And this will all come together in a way so that there will be a consumer-facing mark on your Epic Bar, for example, that'll say the ecological outcomes from this meat have been verified. And then we'll have a way for you to go back and look and not just take their word for it because there's a seal there, but actually go back and look, and there's some hard scientific evidence that you can see the metrics of, like, yep, that farm did that. So like, I know, if carbon sequestration is the thing that I really care about, because I care about climate change and I want to reverse climate change every way that I can, including the foods that I purchase, like that's going to be something that I look out for. So that's something that we've got in the works, because we recognize that there's not this ideal way to really measure outcomes of what's happening on the land. And so that'll be coming out next year at some point.
So it'll be like a seal of like almost like I was in the manufacturing business before I ever was in the fitness world. And, like ISO 9000 was a big one of the quality assurances, a manufacturing process that a company would go through to assure the vendors and the suppliers and the consumer that they were quality. This is a similar thing, but for farms.
Yeah. And so, a lot of the seals like grass-fed or non-GMO or any of those, that's all, a certification process. That's basically a checklist of what did you do, what didn't you do. Mm-hmm. This is going to be more of a verification because it's looking at what's happening on the land.
Right.
So it's slightly different, but there's really not anything out there that's a consumer-facing label that is looking at outcomes.
Right.
So, this is an entirely different approach, but we realized that, climate change is such a big issue. People care about their own personal health. I mean, you've seen paleo and ancestral health has just like skyrocketed in previous years. So people care about the quality of the meat that they're eating. I mean, hell, that's where I came to all of this from. I came about this from the paleo world because I was trying to find better sources of grass-fed beef and got to know local farmers. And then, it was funny. I was, in the paleo world back in like 2008, well,
that was one of my upcoming questions. So let's just do it now. How did you get involved in this work? Like, how did, it doesn't seem like a no-brainer, career path. You didn't go to college looking to work for the Savory Institute, probably.
No, definitely not. I would say, as with, anything, you can't predict where you're going to end up. And so my professional and personal lives kind of collided in this, beautiful cataclysm that has landed me at the Savory Institute where I am now. And, I couldn't be happier that that's where I've ended up. But it was weird, so my professional background, I'm a bioengineer by training. Out of college, I worked for the FDA. regulating cardiovascular devices. So I wasn't on the food side. I was in the medical devices side, basically regulating cardiovascular devices and their clinical trials, designing the clinical trials, making sure that devices were safe and effective before they get sold on the market. So I did that for a number of years.
What kind of devices? What's a cardiovascular device that people might know about?
I was dealing with endovascular grafts specifically. So when someone has an aneurysm on their aorta, there's this procedure where they insert a catheter into your femoral artery, and then it kind of goes up into your aorta and deploys. If you know what a stent is, imagine a really large stent that is covered by a material. So basically, it excludes the aneurysm, so that the aneurysm, which is basically a ballooning of the artery, it prevents that artery from ballooning any further, so that instead of the aneurysm getting bigger, it gets smaller and shrivels over time. So that was like the main thing I worked on. Also, catheters and guide wires and atherectomy devices and stents and anything that was in the cardiovascular system, I basically had my hands on at some point.
Cool.
So I was doing that for a number of years because I was interested in health and biology, and that's kind of where my interests lie. And during the same time, I went paleo back in 2008 or 2009.
Where were you living?
In the Washington, D.C. area.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I was, at the time, I was an ultramarathon runner. And I was looking for some sort of competitive edge. And I stumbled upon Lauren Cordain's Paleo Diet for Athletes, because it was really the only, Rob Wolf's book wasn't even out yet. So this is back in like, let's see, Rob's book wasn't out yet. So like early 2000s or? I think Rob's book came out in either 2008 or 2009.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I remember going on, when his book was released, he was doing book signings, and I went to a local CrossFit gym, and I was like, oh my God, I met Rob Wolf. Who's such a normal guy. Like, he's not a guy you would say, oh my God, I met Rob Wolf. Like, he's no, he's super chill.
Yeah.
And it's great. Like, he and I have become good friends actually now that I'm with the Savory Institute, because he's a big fan of our work, and he speaks at our conferences, and we work together on projects. So he's a big supporter of this stuff, and so we really thank him for that. So anyways, I got involved in paleo in 2009, and then I was looking for better sources of grass-fed beef, and I was in DC, and Polyface Farms. It's the Joel Salatin. He was shown in the documentary Food Inc. And also featured in the book Omnivore's Dilemma. He's that lunatic farmer down in Virginia, or self-described lunatic farmer.
Honestly was my favorite part of the book. I read the Omnivore's Dilemma, and that chapter was just fascinating. And I'm like, God, I need to go there. And I never took action. I never went there.
Yeah, because the book and the movie, it's all doom and gloom. The industrial food system is totally broken. It's disgusting, and it's unfair to animals, and you shouldn't want this. And a lot of people watch that and they're like, I am never eating meat again. No way. No, sir. I can't do that. But then they show Joel, and it's like, but there is hope. There is a better way to do it. And so people think some people take the approach of it's black or white, never eat meat again. And then they go vegan. It's like, well, you totally missed what they were trying to show you in that movie or that book, that there is hope. There is a better way to farm and treat animals and, be a better steward of this planet. And we need to encourage more of that, rather than just saying like, oh, I'm going to go vegan and only eat grains and tofu and all that stuff, which is still based on industrial agriculture, which is not healthy for our planet.
Right.
But so I got off on a tangent.
That's all right. There are a lot of tangents. It's okay. I'll try to keep us on track.
All right, thanks. So I was buying from Joel because he distributes to the DC area.
Did you actually go down to his farm?
Yeah. So I got to go visit Polyface. I got to meet Joel and his son Daniel and others in their operation. And it's just eye-opening to see that stuff in first person. I'm used to, my idea of farming is, you're driving through the eastern shore of Maryland or Delaware, and you're driving past chicken coops that you can smell from a mile away. And it's just like, it's foul.
Yeah.
No pun intended. And then you go to Joel's farm and like you don't smell anything.
Right.
And you're like, oh my God, this is beautiful. This is gorgeous. I love it.
Just for people, listeners out there who have not read the book Omnivore's Dilemma. By the way, if you haven't, it's a fantastic book. Joel is a farmer who, in my simple way of describing it, he just makes use of every aspect of the process of every element of his farm. So there's no waste. There's no, nothing gets thrown away. The waste product from a pig gets used by the chicken. I don't remember the sequence, but it's a fascinating sequence, like how the chickens poop and then they eat or the pigs poop and then they get spread, the manure gets spread out over the thing and the chickens eat it and then the chicken poop. And it's just, it's amazing.
It is. Yeah. And the way he raises his animals isn't just how do those animals work with one another, but also, when you're moving your herd of livestock across your land, let's use some portable electric fencing to keep them tightly bunched together, moving from one piece of land to the next. So they're constantly moving and allowing that grass to fully regrow after it's been grazed down. And so there's that delicate balance of stress on the land and then the proper amount of time afterwards that really gets the best result. And that's really the crux of what we do with the Savory Institute, is teach people how to do that. Joel actually, credits Alan for inspiration to a lot of his work. Alan Savory being the founder of the Savory Institute.
Yeah, right.
But getting back to where I came into all of this, I was buying from Joel's Buyers Club in the DC area, and started to get to visit other farms and just kind of was diving deeper down to the sustainable agriculture hole. Just found it really fascinating and wonderful to get out onto the land and visit farms. And then in 2013, I saw a TED Talk by Alan Savory. And basically what Alan was proposing is that, 1/3 of our Earth's surface is grasslands. It's 5 billion hectares, or, like 10 to 12 billion acres of land. It is grassland. Of that, 70% of that is dying and turning into desert because of mismanagement. And mismanagement is either the approach where we have totally taken animals off of the land, so there's no animal impact whatsoever. You look at our national parks, for example, and there's no grazing animals out there with the exception of like some bison up in Yellowstone.
How does that make the land not as good, for lack of a better word? What does that do?
Yeah, so essentially, if you think of what sustained health on our planet for millennia, if you take an evolutionary history approach and you look back to what was health before humans came along and screwed it all up, similar to what we do with diet and nutrition, and we say, what was our, from an evolutionary perspective, what was a healthy diet before the industrial food system came along and screwed it all up? What did fitness look like before, everything turned into a Cybex machine or whatever? If you do the same thing for looking at the health of the planet, what you see is we had really large swaths of grasslands, 1/3 of the Earth's surface, and there were herds of wild grazing herbivores that were moving around in large herds. Because of the predators that existed, they weren't just like scattered about all over the place. They stayed tightly bunched together in a herd because that provided safety. And in that herd mentality, when they would urinate and defecate on the land after they had grazed it or while they were grazing it, they're like, oh, I don't want to stand in my own urine and dung. They would kind of gradually move along to another piece of land. And they would keep this constant flow of grazing and urinating and defecating on the land, which is providing that fertilization and providing those nutrients back into the land. And then that grazing is kind of that intermittent stress that you're providing, kind of like when we work out, we want to, stress the body, but make sure you get active recovery time afterwards. The same thing was true with them. Because of the predators that existed, they stayed in these tightly bunched herds, regularly moving from one piece of land to the next. And they wouldn't come back to that same piece of land until the grasses had fully regrown to full health, and also the root structure down below had fully regrown. And when you think about it, grass is really it's our natural solar panels. They are, through the photosynthesis process, they are taking solar energy, which is an infinite supply that we have tons of, and through light energy and CO2 out of the atmosphere, they photosynthesize that down into carbohydrates into the soil. And that's what turns, loose, tan looking dirt into rich, dark, black topsoil, is that photosynthetic process drawing carbon out of the atmosphere, pulling it down into the soil. And when you do that, you get rich, healthy soils that are full of, microbes and nematodes and, just all sorts of little critters that are down there, tons of biodiversity.
But from what I hear you saying, though, that it's important that those pieces of grassland get stressed, and the stress occurs from these herds of grazing herbivores who are eating it. It's kind of like the way the human body reacts to stress. Like, stress is not bad. It's just you want to stress it and then you want to recover, and you want to stress it and you want to recover. So it sounds like grassland's the same thing.
Yeah, and you can overstress it and you can understress it.
Right.
And we teach people how to stress it the perfect amount, so that you get the optimal health out of that land and then the animals and everything resulting from that. Same thing as, someone who's a total couch potato, they're just sitting there not exercising at all. That would be like removing animal impact off the land altogether. Like, that's not good. That's not going to be healthy for you.
Right.
But, you also go to, I used to be an ultra marathon runner. I understand overtraining. I was running ultras when I got into CrossFit. I didn't do any adrenal testing, but I bet you my adrenals were shocked to hell.
100%. Yes.
Yeah.
I used to do Eco Challenge, so I'm very much aware of the ultra marathon world. I did one. I tried. It's a funny side note. I thought, so I was a Marine also, and I thought when my teammates suggested that one of the first major training things we did was to go run a 50-mile ultra marathon.
Nice.
We did it down in the San Juan Hills in Southern California. That I thought, well, I've run 10K before. I'd never run longer than 10K. I'd never done really anything endurance, like from the real endurance standpoint. And I thought, I'll just tough it out. I'll just tough it out. And the freaking course almost killed me. I mean, I was the last guy on the course. The sag wagon was driving behind me. It was like 7:30 at night. Sun was setting. They were about to pull me off the course. I was limping because my knees were shot. It took me like 4 months to recover from that. It's one of the stupidest things I ever did.
That's how I got out of ultra running, really, is I had a slew of injuries. So after the last 100-miler I ran, it was in Virginia. I got second place. I ran it in 16 hours and 11 minutes.
Well, you didn't tell everybody that there were only 2 runners in it.
There were like 100 of them.
I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
It's not like it was a couple thousand like the Marine Corps marathon or anything, but I'll take second place if I can.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I am totally joking. That is phenomenal. I mean, it's amazing to me the number of people that actually will enter a race that's 100 miles. Like it just. I mean, 50 miles was so far. I can't even really. They do Western States every year, and that's a 100-mile. Brutal thing, and or Leadville, or just these unbelievable.
It's brutal. I mean,
races.
It takes a certain mindset to want to do that. You have to be a masochist for pain, which I guess I don't know what that says about me, but I did that for a number of years. But after the last 100-miler I had some IT band syndrome that took 6 months to heal.
Right.
And then when that healed, I jumped right in and did a 100K, and in that race, I felt pain in my knee, and I ended up having to limp my way to the finish line. And it turns out I had a stress fracture on my femur.
Whoa!
So I ran through a stress fracture on my femur, and so I kind of took that year as an indicator, that my body was trying to tell me something of like, hey man, maybe you don't need to be running 80 to 100 miles a week. Maybe you should kind of lay off a little bit and try to find some healthy balance.
Oh, you were overgrazing. You were over.
I was overgrazed. Exactly. And so, since we're going on tangents, but to try to tie it back. So what would that look like in the agricultural setting? So in terms of grazing animals on the land, Overgrazing would be if you take your herd of cows and you set them out to your pasture and you just leave them there for 6 months or a year, whatever it is, then you round them up and then you go and cull them off or sell them or whatever it may be. When you do that, they are going to overgraze their favorite grasses and they are going to undergraze their less favorite grasses. Same thing like when you go to like a buffet line, you're going to look around and see what you like and you're going to take your favorite things. But if you've got like a ton of people that are all swarming that buffet at the same time, you're not going to be as selective. You're going to take what you can get.
Right.
We want the cows to take what they can get because we want them to kind of have a more even distribution of what's going on so that there's a greater biodiversity. We want everything to have an equal chance, or at least do it in the order that was most natural to how that land would have evolved.
Right.
So instead of just leaving them out to graze for 6 months, a year, whatever it may be, we then bring them together into a herd using portable electric fencing, or some people herd with cattle dogs and on horseback or four-wheelers or whatever it may be.
When I hear you say portable electric fencing, I think of a fence with wheels on the bottom of it. And I'm guessing that's probably not what you're talking about.
No, it's...
like you got a remote control and the thing just wheels itself around.
Not quite. So essentially what it is like there are these little posts that you put into the ground every 10 or 20 feet, and they're super lightweight, and there's this poly wire that attaches to each post. And so it's on a spool, and then you just drive along on your four-wheeler or you walk your farm by hand, and you drop them down, and then you've got the spool of wire that's running with you, and then you drop it down. You basically create the perimeter of your fence, and then you hook it up to a battery.
With one wire.
Some people do single strand. There's other times there's a need for double strand.
Do cows are that will keep them in? They're pretty.
Yeah. I mean, they learn, and sometimes it's a learning process. The more experienced cows in that herd, the mamas who have been around for a while, they're gonna, the calves are gonna, be touching that fence and getting zapped a little more than they should.
Yep.
The mamas, kind of keep them away from it. Single strand, double strand is what you see on a lot of cattle operations or goats or sheep herding. When you get up to larger animals like bison, that requires a bit more heavy duty fencing, because those are, they're more wild. They're more likely to run through a fence, even if it's got an electric charge on it.
How strong is the charge on these fences? Are they? Is it like a stun gun?
No. I mean, I've electrocuted myself on it on multiple occasions just because I didn't realize that the wire was hot and I accidentally leaned up against it. And it's just, it's something where you're like, oh God, okay, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Whoops.
Right.
So it's not like it's painful or abusive or anything. It's
and
something.
It goes right through the fur, right through their coat. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. I don't know how that works with sheep that have a really thick fur. There might be something different on that one. But I'm the guy that talks about our work. I'm not out there managing the herd. I just get, I was out at my friend Jeff Tucker's house in Texas. He's got about 12 heads of cattle, 15 head of cattle on a small ranch. And, we went out and we drove the fences and drove it's a full on, working farm. It's a ranch. It's not a farm. Right.
And, his cattle, I mean, they're surprisingly, they're docile, but it was my first time really being around, a bunch of cattle, and they can be aggressive. I mean, they are not, they're friendly. I love them. They're adorable, but there was a mother that was pregnant and there were a couple babies, and, he's like, you just got to kind of watch yourself around them because they will. They're 1,500 pounds, and anytime you move something 1,500 pounds, it's, it's like it doesn't have to be moving fast to hurt you.
Yeah, that is.
And they
is
do
very
move
true.
fast, and they also move fast. I mean, they can, right, they can.
Although it's funny, so we, the Savory Institute, we have a bison ranch outside of Denver that was given to us recently. So, otherwise, we don't own property. We just kind of teach people how to do this.
Yep.
But now we've got this great opportunity. There's a bison ranch that, we're the landowners for. And so I get to go out there all the time whenever like a documentary crew wants to come out or people want to come see it. And so, like I was out there this weekend and I was filming some promos for some marketing materials. And, I'm sitting there talking to my camera and like the herd of bison is behind me. But I keep looking back behind me because, I can sense that they're getting closer. I don't have my eyes on them. And so like, as you watch these marketing materials, I'm like, God, I look like such a scaredy cat. Like I'm sitting there like, hi, Bobby with the Savory Institute here, blah, 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 blah. And like, I keep turning around like every 5 seconds to check on the bison. Like, I'm worried I'm going to die.
Right.
Kind of look.
But they're not aggressive. I mean, it's not like they're going to come eat you. It's not like the Stranger Things beasts, that are going to come get you.
It is not the upside down. It's not the Demogorgon.
Right.
But it, bison are more of a wild animal than cattle, which have been domesticated for the last 10,000 years. So, bison I'm much more careful around because you're not going to walk up to a bison and pet it. You're going to keep a safe distance from, I have pet one before, but, that was kind of like I found myself in a scenario where I was like, I'll get a quick pet in and then back off. Versus cattle have been domesticated for, 10,000 years now. Their genetics are much more docile. They're used to being managed by humans.
Yeah.
So, kind of different dynamics there. And then bison are bigger. Their temperament is, a little more, you got to watch out for. And they've got those horns on their head. They are strong. They are fast. But man, they are a beautiful, majestic creature.
Yeah. There was a herd of bison on Camp Pendleton. I'm sure it's still there because it roamed wild on Camp Pendleton. Camp Pendleton is a massive Marine base between Orange County between San Diego and Orange County, right on the border. And it's a huge, pristine swath of land that the Marine Corps got. I don't know how they got it, but was a ranch. It was a farm ranch, and they've basically maintained its integrity. Like they've got ranges and they've got places they shoot their weapons and whatnot, but it is just a very natural habitat for it's probably even in better shape now than it was 50 years ago. These bison, we would see these herds of bison just roaming around out there. It's funny. Sometimes
it's crazy. Like you think back to what health on this planet used to be. The large grazers that existed in North America, the charismatic megafauna that we had. Bison was the main megafauna that was grazing the Great Plains and the prairies and the rangelands of North America. And they were kept in check by, gray wolves, and there were actually grizzly bears that were on the plains as well. And so those were their predators. But, we used to have 60 million bison in North America.
Wow.
And then at one point, I want to say it got down to less than 100 because of all the hunting and wiping out, kind of when Native
not
American,
100,000, 100.
100.
That's like a.
And estimates are different. I think some people say 1,000, some people say less than 100.
Right.
Either way, it was a lot less than the 60 million that it was at one point.
Yeah, that could fit on the head of a pin. I mean, compared to the number that there were.
Yeah, and so this was back in I want to say the early 1900s is when it was down that low. And so some specific conservation efforts were put into place to bring back the bison, just because we had overhunted them and, kind of with, Andrew Jackson and the Trail of Tears and all of that when, Europeans came to North America and, we kind of wiped out a lot of the native populations. A key piece of that was wiping out their main source of food and leather and just everything that they used, which, bison just supplied them with all of their livelihood.
Yep.
And so if you decimate the bison populations, guess what? You've got control over those native peoples. And so that was a big piece of that. So, the population was down to 100 or so bison. And since then, we've brought it back up to, I want to say about 400,000 is the last estimate that I heard earlier this year. And so there's a big push to bring back the bison populations. I know the National Bison Association is trying to get us to 1 million. So we're trying to double the production. So they're trying to encourage more people to eat more bison meat and, shop for that, which I think is great.
So eating more bison meat leads to more farmers who are willing, or ranchers who are willing to raise bison because there's a market for bison. So okay, got it. Like if you on one hand, you could think if you eat more, that means less bison, but
no. Well, you want more because you want more farmers to get into that business. You want them to raise more, which are going to birth more. And
is it harder to raise bison than cattle?
I mean, it takes a little more infrastructure in terms of the fencing that's necessary.
Yep.
And it, you handle them a little bit differently. But no, I wouldn't say so. There's plenty of people that are doing it, and I'd say there's plenty of demand for it as well. Or there's plenty of options. Like you go out now. Epic Bar that we were talking about, their best-selling bar is their bison cranberry bar. That was the first ever product that they made.
Yep.
And you see that on all of their packaging and whatnot. Actually, Taylor and Katie, the founders of Epic Bar, they actually just bought a ranch themselves in Texas, and they have a herd of 28 bison that they just brought out onto their ranch a few weeks ago.
Wow.
So they are now bison ranchers.
That's
so
cool.
They are, fully in it. They believe in it. They sell the product. They encourage regenerative agriculture everywhere that they can. And now they're like, truly, walking the walk by raising the animals themselves, which I think is commendable.
What are the biggest challenges you have? And that could be either you yourself around what you do, or the Savory Institute in general. What are you up against?
We are up against a lot of misinformation that is out there, whether intentionally or unintentionally, whether it is coming from, PETA folks that are, you can't kill any animals because morally that's wrong, or, you shouldn't eat meat. And so that's more of the intentional misinformation that comes out there in terms of statistics that people start talking about, which are incorrect, or just conventional wisdom, which, I think those of us in this ancestral health and lifestyle space kind of recognize that conventional wisdom isn't always the greatest. You shouldn't just trust it blindly. There's a lot of stuff that you maybe want to ask, like, well, where did that information come from originally and why? And do we want to revisit that and maybe take a different look at it? So, some of the main topics that float around in the beef space would be, water usage for raising beef, or land usage, or methane. And I could dive into any number one of those. So water specifically, Diana Rogers over at Sustainable Dish has a really great blog post kind of outlining the water usage statistics, where a lot of the stats people say, like, 1 pound of beef requires 20,000 gallons of water, or whatever it may be. In a grass-fed operation, the water that they're talking about is the water that's naturally falling onto the land to grow the grass. It's not talking about the actual water consumption of the animal. When you look at a feedlot beef operation, that industrial system, most of the water is what's going into, there's the water that's necessary to raise the corn that is being fed to them, which is not good for their diet. They're less healthy animals. But then there's also the water that they're drinking in the feedlots, all this extra stuff coming involved. And so the majority of the water in a grass-fed operation is what's naturally falling. The majority of the water in a feedlot operation is what has to be pumped in from elsewhere because everything's been externalized and industrialized. Right. And so there's different processes at place. And so it's not fair to say, like, this one requires more water than the other, because the rain's going to be falling on that land regardless. We're just treating the land how it wants to be treated by having the right amount of animal impact on there and using that to create healthier land and healthier animals. With the land usage piece, that's another one where they will look at just the size of, they'll look at the size of a grass-fed ranch, versus a feedlot beef operation, and say, well, the feedlot operation, has, this really high density of animals in this small space. So therefore it is more effectively utilizing acreage on our planet versus, that grass-fed beef operation. You've got this huge ranch out in Montana or wherever. Well, what they're not factoring into consideration is the land that's being taken to grow all of that grain that is being fed back to those cattle. Right. So if you take into consideration the size of that land plus the size of the feedlot, it becomes a much different picture and becomes in favor of the grass-fed. The methane topic is one that I find extremely interesting because everyone's like, cows burp, it releases methane. And if you look at the research, yes, a grass-fed cow, because their life expectancy is longer, because it takes longer to raise a grass-fed cow than it does to raise a cow in a feedlot, the total amount of methane that they're going to produce over their lifetime is going to be longer on an individual cow basis.
Can I go back to something you said? Sorry, I will get right back to it. A cow burps methane?
Yeah.
Not farts, burps.
It's burps, yeah. So
out of its mouth.
Yeah, so
you could light a cow's burp on fire, like you could light a fart on fire.
Oh God. I mean, I wouldn't recommend you go try that.
I didn't say no. I'm not condoning that activity at all. Either one of those two activities.
Well, methane is a byproduct of the fermentation that happens in the rumen. The rumen is that special organ of, that 4-chamber stomach that a cow has that we don't have.
Right.
And so when they eat grass, the grass goes into the rumen and they've got microbes that are there in their rumen. And it's basically like a fermentation vat. Right. It's dark and it's moist. There's all these bacteria that are decomposing this grass and the cellulose and turning that into energy that then gets digested through the other organs. We don't have a rumen, so we can't eat grass or anything that's cellulose-based. Right. So when you have land that is grass, the only animal that can benefit, that can turn that cellulose, that grass, into caloric value and nutrient-dense food for us is ruminant animals. That's the only one that can do that because they're the only ones that have the proper stomach for it.
Right.
But that fermentation process, methane is a byproduct that comes out. And so in that digestion process,
they burp up methane.
They burp up some of it.
Got it. Okay,
and so that's what gets released. So I was saying that a grass-fed cow, because it lives longer, produces more methane over the totality of its life versus a feedlot cow. But what those stats aren't taking into consideration is the total life cycle analysis. So looking at not just what is coming out of the enteric emissions being the cow itself, but also looking at what's happening on the land. When you've got a healthy grass-fed operation and you have healthy grasslands, there are microbes that are called methanotropes, or methane oxidizing bacterial species, MOBs. Those live in healthy grasses in the soil, and those methanotropes sequester methane out of the atmosphere and pull it down into the soil and break it down. So you're actually sequestering more methane out of the atmosphere on the whole in a healthy grass-fed, holistically managed system than if you were in a feedlot. So if you take that full life cycle into consideration, a healthy grassland ecosystem is actually a methane sink, and it's removing methane, which is way more problematic in our atmosphere as a greenhouse gas, 30 times more destructive to our atmosphere than CO2. So it's critically important that you remove that methane from the atmosphere. So those that are all, got their panties in a bunch about methane, what they should be worried about is how is that land being treated, because a healthy grassland ecosystem can sequester that methane and pull it out and, oxidize it down in the soil where it belongs.
Wow. That's fascinating.
So, yeah. And so those are pieces that are out there, and there's literature that supports all of that. The methane piece that I was just talking about, for example, comes from Jason Roundtree out of Michigan State University. He had a paper in 2016 that looked at that full life cycle analysis. It just so happens that Jason is also a practitioner of holistic management. He's part of our Savory Global Network. So, he kind of recognizes that when you take this holistic approach, there are other things happening that a lot of people aren't really looking at. And so his work is really trying to get research out there in peer-reviewed journals that's reputable, so that when all this disinformation that's going out there by the vegans or the people that are just saying cows are a problem and they degrade our land, well, it's not cows themselves that are a problem. It's how they are managed on that land that is either a problem or a benefit to the land.
Right.
And that was really the crux of Alan Savory's TED Talk, is, showing pictures of land that has been desertified and it's barren and dying, and there's all the carbon that's being released out of the soil into the atmosphere, and it just looks like crap. But when properly managed, those barren landscapes in just a few years can transform into these lush, vibrant ecosystems that are full of life, and there's tall grasses all over the place. And those before and after photos are just mind-blowing. Like, that was the hook for me when I realized, oh man, I got into all of this looking for better sources of grass-fed beef, because I was worried about my own personal health, Bobby's health as an individual and as an athlete. But there is so much more to that. The way that those animals are managed on that land can improve the health of the land. It can reverse climate change through the carbon sequestration because of the deep perennial grass roots. It can help the water holding capacity. It can bring back wildlife biodiversity. It can help reestablish those, economic dynamics between rural and urban communities, because if a farmer is able to raise more cattle because he's got healthier land, he's going to be selling more cattle. He's going to have a healthier local business that's going to employ more people, and that money is going to stay locally in that local community, which is going to be better for everyone, because a lot of our systems now are kind of all centralized, where a lot of the money just gets pulled all to the top of, big food, big ag, big pharma, big whatever. It kind of keeps everything decentralized and distributed and, kind of in the hands of those local communities. And I was like, oh my God, all of these big global crises that we have, whether it's climate change or, floods and droughts, or like the socioeconomic pieces with rural communities, like all of these things are interconnected, and it all comes back to how do we manage our land. And if land is managed in a way that most closely replicates what ancestrally provided health to our planet, you're going to get the beneficial outcomes to all of these things. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially what we're out there trying to do, is show everyone that when you take this holistic approach to managing your land and livestock, it's going to have all these wonderful downstream effects, and you're going to have this life of abundance and health. And that's from an economic perspective, what the land looks like and how beautiful it is and how vibrant it is, and like how healthy is the meat that's coming off of your land, and how healthy is your family and your community, and all this stuff. It's all tied together. And so like that, realizing that there was more to it than just my own personal health was just this light bulb moment. And I became like a zealot for the Savory Institute. And so I was living in Denver, and I knew that Savory was right up the road in Boulder. And so basically I did whatever I could to facilitate an introduction, because I was just like, I know that they're there. They're within a half-hour drive. I will do whatever it takes to support these guys and to get involved with their movement, because what they're doing is what we need to fix what's going on in this world. And
the rest is history, I guess.
And the rest is history. And then we saved the planet.
They met you, right? And they were like, wow, we want him as bad as you wanted them. And boom, let's go.
I hope so. I hope they want that.
And
still here. So far, so good.
So I want to just shift gears a little bit and just ask you about yourself. Like, do you maintain that same sort of mindset and philosophy with your own health and your own, like, personally, in the way you manage your life? Like, do you use that same sort of approach it sounds like you were doing before you were at the Savory Institute and maybe now.
Yeah, well, I would say for the most part, I mean, I came to this from the ancestral health side of things. So, I eat a paleo diet. I do CrossFit 5 days a week. I try to get my mobility in. I try to be cognizant of, mindfulness aspects. I'm not the best at some of them. I don't know if we were recording or not at the beginning of this, but I was talking about how I consume so much media and podcasts, audiobooks, and there's so much brain activity at work, and then Netflix and HBO and like just all sorts of things.
Yep.
And then I've got my smartphone that's going off, and I've got notifications on Slack for work, and then I've got Facebook and Instagram and blah 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 blah.
You're
blah,
describing
blah, blah.
the normal human in today's world.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is. All these little notifications and pings and little check of your phone and check your email. It's like it's junk food for the brain.
Yeah, right.
It's not really the healthiest thing for us. And
what do you do? What do you do to try to protect yourself from that, or do you? Do you have any habits? Do you have any morning routine? Do you have an evening routine? How do you deal with that?
I recognize that I need a morning routine, and that there are things that I could do better. Like I meditate sometimes, not as much as I should. Yep. It's one thing that I would like to do more of. I've actually started playing around, the Wim Hof method, doing breath work and cold exposure. There is a sports recovery facility in Denver that I've been going to fairly regularly because I was dealing with a sprained ankle from a climbing incident. But I've been going there, and they've got, among other things, like an infrared sauna. They've got a cryotherapy chamber. They've got hot tubs and cold tubs.
Yep.
So I've been going in there and doing really long ice baths because I find that helps me really focus, just really say like, all right, I'm going to get into the pain cave, but I'm going to accept what's going on here and just focus and just deal with it and just force myself to come to a point of understanding that this is going to be cold, but I can get through this.
How long is really long?
So I've been doing 15 minutes most days.
Wow.
But the other day I did 31.
Wow.
And I did 31 just because I hit 30 and I was like, I want to go a little bit longer. So
how deep in the ice are you? Are you up to your neck? Or are you
up to my neck?
God. I used to do...
And I will say that that's not ice. So this is a cold tub. So
okay.
They keep the cold tub between 50 and 60 degrees. It's normally like 52 or 53.
That's cold.
Which is supposed to be the therapeutic range for, sports injuries and kind of the adaptation for creating brown fat and, all that sort of stuff. So it's still super cold though.
Yeah, no, I go to a spa. I hate to call it a spa. It's not. It's a Russian bathhouse kind of in Los Angeles.
Do they put cucumbers on your eyes?
No, they do not put cucumbers. They whip you with eucalyptus branches. So like it's as unrelaxing as cucumbers may be relaxing. It's almost the antithesis of that. They have the hot sauna is it's over 200 degrees. It might be 220 degrees. I don't know how hot it is, but it's the hottest room I've ever been in. I can't really spend more than about 10 minutes in it without feeling like I'm baking. I'm actually cooking. And then they have a cold plunge, and the philosophy from Russia, and I don't know how long this has been part of their culture, is this alternating hot and cold, heat and super hot, super cold, super hot, super cold, and do it in cycles. So as soon as I step out of this super hot sauna, dry sauna, I jump into this cold plunge, and the cold plunge is right around 50 degrees. And it probably feels more extreme than it is because of the fact that I just got out of the super hot room. But it's all I can do to stay in that thing up to my neck for about 20 seconds. I've made it to a minute like twice because I always count in my head to help time go. Like for some reason, counting helps me kind of stay in the moment and go, okay, you can do this. You got 5 more seconds. Okay, you can do this. You got 5 more seconds. Okay, you can do but then there's then they have a pool that's probably more like 62 or 63 4 degrees. And then I jump in that pool after the cold plunge, which feels kind of warm after that.
Yeah, for sure. It's all a matter of context. And it's one of those things that, I'll notice if I haven't been doing my cold tub baths for a couple weeks and I get back in, I'll be shivering like crazy, like teeth chattering. And when I get out, I'm still shivering for like a half hour afterwards.
What kind go ahead, sorry. But if you do
but if I go regularly and if I'm going, a couple times a week, it's no problem. And I can sit in there and I'm like, it's cold, but no big deal. And then, it feels like nothing. So it's funny how you adapt to that cold exposure. And it's interesting because like you think of, native people that lived in cold climates.
Yep.
When the Europeans came to Plymouth Rock, I think like the Bostonians out there, they were just in like a loincloth and it was winter.
Right.
And so, those guys can deal with these cold temperatures. It's like, well, how come they can deal with that? Yet we as individuals, like I need my, Patagonia down jacket that keeps me, totally dry and temperature regulated and whatnot. But back in the day, like Sir Edmund Hillary was summiting Everest with, probably gear that no one would dare try.
Yeah, wool socks, wool mittens, I watched a, what's the name of the documentary? Oh, it wasn't a documentary. It was a reenactment of climbing, the first climb of the Eiger, and the first successful climb of the Eiger. And it was it wasn't intended to be a competition, but it turned out that 2 climbing parties were eyeballing this thing for months and became adversaries on the same weekend when they decided they were going to climb this thing, and it was going to be the first. And I may it's been a while since I've watched it. It might not have been the first effort, and they weren't successful. They didn't make it to the top. I wish I remember the name of that documentary. I gotta do some research and find it, and I'll put it in the show notes.
That sounds awesome. I would love to watch that.
It's really good. It's really, really good, and it does not have a Hollywood ending. Let me just tell you, it's hard to watch.
A lot of mountain pursuits end that way.
Yeah.
Especially back in the olden days before people really knew what they were doing.
Yeah, right. I mean,
thankfully now,
they had no weather forecasts. They had nothing. They just, they had a couple ropes. They didn't even know what to make ropes out of.
But back then, people were more resilient. They didn't have all the technical gear that we had. They were more connected to their land, and so they had a more generalized skill set on just how to read the land, how to work with the land, how to survive.
Because they had to. They had to.
Yeah, because they had to. Yeah. And like you think to where we are nowadays, and we've gotten soft as a species because we've been domesticated. Yeah. We've got our nice, comfy cubicles that we work in, and we got the cafeteria that we go down to that has the guaranteed source of food, and then you go and you work out in your controlled gym environment and all this stuff. And
I wanted to get back to the ice. What kind of improvements have you seen that makes you keep doing it?
I don't know if I've seen like visible improvements. I definitely feel better after a heavy lifting day. So if my body's totally destroyed, after like a really heavy back squat cycle or something, that definitely helps in terms of my recovery. And I will notice that I sleep better on days that I have done cold plunges. But like I haven't noticed any body composition changes, which is fine. I'm not really in it for that. I care more about, trying to get a 400-pound back squat and a 500-pound deadlift.
So are you doing it more for you're trying to keep yourself mentally tough, or are you doing it more for the physiological recovery? Why do you keep doing it? Because it's not easy, and it takes time, and it's freaking hard as heck to.
Yeah, it is. And I would say I'm doing it for all of that. I mean, I got into it originally for the recovery aspects, just to recover after hard workouts, or if I was dealing with a specific injury that I was trying to increase my recovery time for. But, over time, doing these cold plunges and then kind of learning about the Wim Hof method and, kind of realizing like, cold exposure, you're building mitochondria and brown fat in your system, and then you're kind of more resilient as an individual when it comes to getting outside in the elements, and you can withstand more as a human than you think you can. Mental toughness aspects. I think all of that's wonderful, and I try to put myself into those challenging situations when I can. I mean, going back to my ultra running days, it was pushing the body to see what was possible, and kind of getting out of that comfort zone. Because when you get out of your comfort zone, essentially what you're doing is expanding your comfort zone. So that way, the next time you're exposed to that discomfort, you're like, I've been here before. It ain't that bad.
Right.
Okay, I've run 12, 24 hours before. Like, I can do this. Like, I've been suffering this bad before. Like, I know I'll survive.
Yep.
I think that's a great piece that I really appreciate, even though, in the moment it's not fun. So you're not getting that firsthand fun, but it's kind of a secondhand fun.
What's like the CrossFit phrase, it doesn't have to be fun to be fun. That was on one of the first t-shirts I ever got. Doesn't have to be fun to be fun. That was, I love that phrase.
Did that have the picture of Pukey the Clown on it?
Yeah, it did. Of course.
Yeah, man.
It was.
Remember when CrossFit
I bought that in 2004.
The,
I mean, it was it was the first CrossFit t-shirt I owned.
I love that. I remember, like, I still have CrossFit shirts that had like skulls and Pukey the Clown, and like the branding was all sort of that. And then Reebok came along and everything changed.
All that. Yeah.
Everything
changed. Everything changed. Bobby, so let's go back to the Savory Institute stuff, and I want to just ask you, just to kind of wrap things up, what can people do at home? What can consumers do at home, like people that are listening to this podcast, to either inform themselves more, or like it was kind of the question I asked before, where should I buy my grass-fed beef? Like where should I be looking, and what should I be doing to help further the mission of the Savory Institute? What do I do? What do people do?
That is a great question, and I wish more people would think like that, because we all are voting with our wallet on a day-to-day basis, whether it's the food we purchase or the leather boots we purchase or the wool beanie or whatever it may be. These things all come from agriculture in some way, shape, or form. So if you pay attention and ask questions, you'll be surprised at what you find. I mean, we talked a little bit about the land to market program, those ecological outcomes being verified and being able to see that on the consumer packaging, to know that land was improved,
which isn't available yet. That's next year.
It's not, yeah. Right. So that's not yet available. Keep an eye out for that to come in 2018 at some point. Look out, look for your Epic bars and see what's going on in the label there, because that'll be showing up soon.
But what would you like if you and I were just on a phone call and I called you up and said, "Hey, Bobby, where should I buy my grass-fed beef?" What would you tell me if? I mean, maybe not one place, but what would you tell me to look at?
Yeah. Well, if you go to the Savory Institute's website, it's savory.global. We have a map on there that has our hubs around the world.
Okay.
The hubs are not necessarily brands or farmers that are selling meat, to people
to consumers,
that call them up. Yeah. They're mainly in the business of training and the educational piece, but a lot of them do run their own farms and ranches. But those local hubs can get you in touch with farmers and ranchers in your area who are managing land holistically, who are doing this holistic planned grazing that has these wonderful outcomes. So that's kind of the ideal scenario.
Okay.
I know that's, sometimes people want like a very quick solution where it's like, well, I want to see a map that shows me exactly sort of distance from my zip code right now.
Yeah.
And so if you want something like that, there is a website called eatwild.com. I think it's eatwild.org. But that is a database of grass-fed beef farmers and ranches and stores. And so if you go to Eat Wild, you got to search around a little bit on their site, but they have a map that's searchable, and it can show you farms that are in the area. One thing about that is that's just going to say if it's grass-fed beef or not. That's not looking at the land management piece, which I think is, what we've been talking about. I think that's the piece that is missing from a lot of these conversations. Yeah, so that would be probably the closest aspect. But really, what you should do is go to the farm. Like, go meet your farmer, shake their hand, ask questions. Like, they are always happy to talk to you, to show you what's going on. There is this extreme disconnect from people that are living in urban settings or in cities that have no idea where their food comes from. They've never been out to a farm. They've never seen how cows are raised. And just seeing that firsthand, I think, is an enlightening experience. I know it was for me, and it set the wheels in motion for me to make this what my life's work is all about.
Yeah.
And so while you're out there trying to find better sources of food, find out who the farmer is, go and see what's happening on the land, get comfortable with them, build a relationship, because that's going to be the greatest thing you can do for reestablishing this connection back to the land is meeting the farmer and seeing firsthand how the food that you're buying every day, where it comes from.
And how does the Savory Institute, if somebody's inspired by Alan Savory or by what you've said today and what you're talking about, can they support the Savory Institute? Is that
we are a nonprofit, so nonprofits rely on the support of others, and so we would happily accept donations. We would encourage donations. If you go to savory.global/donate, you can donate there. I was crunching some numbers earlier this year, trying to look at how effective we are at being able to influence land. And so I looked at how much land we've influenced since we started setting up our hubs, and then how much money how much donations came into our organization. And when you distill it down, for every $30 that comes into the Savory Institute, we're able to positively impact 100 acres of land. And that's a pretty efficient conversion of donation dollars to being able to make a change. 100 acres of land is a pretty big piece for just $30.
Yep.
So, think back to, what you can spare and what you want.
That's a really cool way of looking at it. A lot of times when I make donations that are small, under $100, sometimes I feel like, does this really matter? Is it really making a difference under $100?
A lot of times, yeah. And there's a lot of organizations.
$30, 100 acres. 100 acres is huge. I grew up in Maryland on a property that was 1 acre, and that was huge. 100 of those is a massive, massive area, and that $30. Wow.
Yeah, and when you look, so research, back to some of the researchers that are focusing on this, they're looking at carbon sequestration rates of what happens in holistically managed lands. When switching from conventional grazing over to holistic management, a farm can sequester 3 tons of carbon per hectare per year. And so that's per hectare, and so per acre, that's probably 6 tons of carbon per acre per year. But you multiply that times 100 acres, 600 tons of carbon. That's starting to move the needle with climate change. So that's fairly significant. Those are big numbers. We would welcome donations if people want to support. It's the end of the year right now, so it's the season of giving. We actually have a fundraising campaign going on called the Season of Grazing. So, we're trying to turn the season of giving into the season of grazing.
Yeah.
We've got some fundraising targets to hit. So we would welcome everyone to donate to our campaign. Or
cool.
If you want to start a fundraiser, you can start a fundraising page and use that to then, post on social media. And
you can run an ultra to raise money for the Savory Institute.
You totally could. Yeah. And we've got fundraising prizes that are all set up. So there's a T-shirt. You can get a signed copy of Alan Savory's book.
Wow.
You can get we've got a really cool silver belt buckle. Even a trip to Zimbabwe with Alan. Depending on how much you fundraise. So a lot of ways to get involved actually. So as a nonprofit, yes, send your monies our way.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Bobby, thank you so much. God, I learned a lot during this podcast, and I really wish, luck. Luck is the wrong word. I just think the work that you're doing and the Savory Institute's doing is so valuable and so important for the world we live in. And me as a meat eater, and one who understands the importance of eating grass-fed beef, and it's not just about grass-fed. There's more to it than grass-fed.
It is,
and I just really appreciate the time and the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk to folks more about this, because it's a topic that is going to become more and more discussed, as regenerative agriculture kind of starts to grow into consumer consciousness. It's something that needs to happen given the state of a lot of things going on in the world. So it's inevitable that it comes about. We're honored to be the ones that are kind of, leading the charge in educating those boots on the ground. But, the boots on the ground are one piece. The consumer and what they purchase on a day-to-day basis is, the other piece of that puzzle that is critically needed. So the more people that realize this and they start voting with their dollar in favor of these regenerative products, the better off our planet's going to be. And, there is hope.
There is hope. There absolutely is.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to. Are you going to be at the Paleo FX again this year? Are you going to drop in and make an appearance?
I imagine. Yeah. I went to the first one, and I went to this past year. It was amazing to see how things have changed.
Yep.
So yeah, I think I'll be out there again this year. I haven't worked out my plans yet, but yeah. Hopefully we'll get to catch up and eat some wonderful holistically raised steak together.
That'd be great. All right, man. Thanks again.
Thanks, Andy.
Take care.
Bye.
The Whole Life Podcast is produced by our podcast team, Winslow Jenkins, Becca Borowski, and Ernie Hurtado. You can find all of our episodes, links, and complete show notes at wholelifechallenge.com/podcast. The way that I've found is the best way to listen to podcasts is to subscribe so that episodes automatically get delivered right to your mobile device. You can do that in any podcast app on your phone. And hey, if you like the podcast, please do me a favor. Go to iTunes and give it a 5-star rating. And recommend it to your friends. I'm Andy Petronic, and thanks so much for listening.